Chapter 13 of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in public domain. Time had dragged its slow way past 6:30. The excuse of a flying start on the Harris case had worn thin to the point of delicacy, to all but one man. The rest of them hoped sincerely that he was keeping himself interested. Westervelt sat at his desk, perusing an article in Spaceman's World about the exploration of a newly discovered planetary system. It might come up in a conference someday, he reflected, and it might be as well to know a few facts on the subject. No life had been discovered on any of the dozen planets, but that did not necessarily preclude the establishment of a Terran colony in the future. He put down the magazine for a moment to review the personnel situation. Parrish, he remembered, had expressed his intention of retreating to his office and putting in an hour or two of desk healing. Under the circumstances, he had declared, there was little point in digging further into the files for an idea, since that was not at all the primary purpose in staying late. Rosencrantz, of course, was on watch in the communications room. Smith wandered in and out. Simonetta had taken a portable taper down to Ladman's office to help organize a preliminary report the chief had requested from him. After she had returned and fallen to low-voiced gossip through the window with Pauline, Beryl had been sent back with a number of scribbled objections for Ladman to answer. Smith had spent all of 5 minutes thinking them up before Simonetta brought the original report. Westervelt wondered how soon Beryl would return with the answers, because it would then probably be his turn to ride herd. He did not regard the idea with relish. Smith strolled out of his office. He halted to survey the nearly empty office with an air of vague surprise, then saw Simonetta outside Pauline's cubicle. He went over to join the conversation. I should have walked out somewhere, thought Westervelt. Now the door is completely blockaded. The magazine article turned dull immediately. Sure enough, in a few minutes Smith approached Westervelt's corner. "Who's on watch, Willie?" he asked, attempting a jovial wink. "Beryl, I think," answered the youth. "Must be. She hasn't been around." "She's been there quite a while," commented Smith. "I have a feeling that it's time for a shift. How about wandering down there and edging in?" "What would I say?" objected Westervelt. "He's probably dictating his remarks and wouldn't like me hanging around." Smith chewed on his lower lip. "For the questions I sent him," he muttered thoughtfully, 5 minutes should have been enough. "Goldilocks has been with him for over half an hour. But he must be tired of my face," said Westervelt. "I don't have anyone else to send, unless you want me to think up an excuse for Pauline. Asking him to help with her homework would be pretty thin." Westervelt thought it over. Parrish, in his present mood, was not likely to be of any help. Simonetta had just done her stint, and Joe was needed on the space set. It would have been nice if there were a message for Ladman to listen to, but that was wishful dreaming. "All right, Mr. Smith," he surrendered. "Maybe I can take along this article and ask if he's seen it yet. If he's taking an inventory or trying out something in the lab, I'll take my life in my hands and volunteer to help." Smith laughed. "Can't be that bad, Willie," he said, slapping the other on the shoulder. Westervelt was not so sure, but he folded the magazine open to the beginning of his article and went out. Pauline peered at him as he passed. "Don't look like that," he said. "You'll see me again, I hope." "You might try looking a little more confident of that yourself," Simonetta called after him. Westervelt turned the corner and walked slowly down the hall, trying out more confident expressions as he went. None of them felt exactly right. Passing the spare office where the dead files were kept, he heard a sound. They must have come up here for something, he thought. That's why it seemed so long to Smitty. He had opened the door and taken one step inside before he realized that the room was dark. Without thinking, he reached out to flip the light switch. Beryl Austin leaped to her feet with a flash of thigh that hardly registered on Westervelt in the split second of his astonishment. Then he saw that she had not been alone on the settee that stood beside the door. Parrish rose beside her. The suddenness of their movements and the ferocity of their combined stares had the impact of a stunning blow upon Westervelt. The implications of the blonde's slightly disheveled appearance, however, were obvious. He could not, for a moment, think at all. Then he began to have a feeling that he ought to say something to cover his escape. Beneath that, somewhere, surged the conviction that he had nothing to apologize for. In the face of such hostility and tension, it called for a lot of courage. "You little sneak," spat Beryl. Westervelt noted with a certain detachment that her voice had turned shrill. Not knowing of anything else to do, he stared as she tugged her dress into place. This seemed to outrage her more than anything he could have said. He also saw the gleam of Parrish's teeth, and the grimace was not even remotely a smile. The man took a step to place himself before Beryl. "What do you think you're doing?" demanded Parrish with a good deal more feeling than originality. Westervelt had been wondering what to say to that when it came, as was inevitable. A dozen half-expressed answers flitted through his mind. How do you get out of a thing like this? He asked himself desperately. You'd think it was me that did it. Before he could explore the implications of his choosing the words, did it, Beryl found her voice again. Get out of here, she shrilled. Who told you to come poking in? I heard a noise, said Westervelt, conscious that his voice sounded odd. I thought it was Mr. Leidman. Do I look like Leidman? Demanded Parrish, not raising his voice as much as Beryl had. There wasn't any light, was there? Did you think he'd be sitting here in the dark? The possibility charged the atmosphere like static electricity. Actually, mere mention of it made Westervelt feel better, because it sounded so much like what he might have found. How did I know? He retorted. I thought Beryl was with him. Why should I expect you? You said you weren't going to dig any further in here. Beryl had been smoothing her still perfect coiffure. Now she stiffened as much as Parrish. Westervelt sensed that his choice of words might have been unfortunate. Well, who is with him? He demanded before they could say anything. The question galvanized Parrish into action. He stepped forward to meet Westervelt face to face. If you're so worried about that, why don't you go find him? He sneered. For my money, you two make a good match. Maybe I will, said Westervelt hotly. You two don't seem to care about what's going on. If you'll just excuse me, I'll turn out the light and... Oh, cut out the speech-making, requested Beryl. Get out of the door, Willie, and let me out of here. I'm tired of the whole incident. Now wait a minute, Beryl, protested Parrish. Yeah, said Westervelt, you'd better check. Your lipstick is really smudged this time. Shut up, you, Parrish snapped. He took Beryl by the shoulders and pulled her back. She pulled herself free peevishly. Westervelt leaned against the wall and curled a lip. Enough is enough, she said. Let me out of here. You forgot to smile, Westervelt told Parrish. The man turned on him and reached out to seize a handful of his shirt front. Westervelt straightened up, alarmed but willing to consider changing the smooth mask of Parrish's face. Beryl was shrilling something about not being damn fools when she stopped in the middle of a word. Parrish also grew still. The forearm Westervelt had crossed over the hand grabbing at his shirt fell as Parrish let him go. The man was staring over Westervelt's shoulder. He looked almost frightened. Westervelt looked around, and a thrill shot through him, like the shock of diving into icy water. Leidman was standing there, staring through him. When he looked again, as he shrank instinctively away from the doorway, he realized that the ex-spacer was staring through all of them. After a moment, he seemed to focus on Beryl. They'll let you out, I think, he said in his quiet voice. Parrish stepped back nervously, and Westervelt edged further inside the doorway to make room. Beryl did not seem to have heard. She gaped, hypnotized by the beautiful eyes set in the strong, tanned face. Leidman put the palm of one hand against Westervelt's chest and shoved slowly. It was as well that the file cabinet behind the youth was nearly empty, because it slid a foot along the floor as his back flattened against it. Leidman reached out his other hand and took Beryl gently by the elbow. She stepped forward, turning her head from side to side as if to seek reassurance from either Parrish or Westervelt, but without completely meeting their eyes. Leidman led her into the hall and released her elbow. She started uncertainly up the corridor toward the main office. Leidman fell in a pace or two behind her. Westervelt heard a gasp. He looked at Parrish and realized that he had been holding his breath too. Then, by mutual consent, they followed the others out into the hall. Listen, Willie, whispered Parrish, watching the 20-foot gap between them and Leidman's broad shoulders. We have to see that she doesn't forget and try to leave. If he won't let me talk to her, you'll have to get her attention. Okay, I'll try, murmured Westervelt. Look, I was really looking for him. I never meant to either, said Parrish. Forget it. It was none of my business. I should have shut up and left. Tell her I'm sorry when you get a chance. She'll probably never speak to me again. He wondered if he could get Smith's permission to move his desk. On second thought, he wondered if he would come out of this with a desk to move. Sure she will, said Parrish. She's really just a good-natured kid. It wasn't anything serious. You startled us, that was all. Beryl and Leidman turned the corner, leaving the two followers free to increase their pace. They rounded the corner themselves in time to see Leidman going through the double doors. It was too bad he came along when she was yelling to be let out, said Parrish. He didn't understand. You mean he actually thought we were trying to keep her there against her will? Asked Westervelt. Well, we were, I suppose, or at least I was. He doesn't seem to think any further than that in such situations. If someone is being held against his will, that's enough for Bob. Did you know Smitty had to post a bond for him? A bond? Repeated Westervelt. What for? They caught him a couple of times, trying out his new gadgets around the city jail. I'll tell you about it sometime. Parrish fell silent as they reached the entrance to the main office. Beryl had gratefully stopped to speak to the first person in sight, which happened to be Pauline. As Parrish and Westervelt arrived, she was offering to take over the switchboard for 20 minutes or so. Oh, I didn't mean you had to drop everything, Pauline was protesting. I just meant, when you get the chance. She eyed Leidman curiously, then looked to the late arrivals. The silly thought that Joe Rosencrantz must feel awfully lonely crossed Westervelt's mind, and he had to fight down a giggle. You really should get out of there for a while, advised Leidman, studying the size of Pauline's cubbyhole. Sit outside a quarter of an hour at least and let your mind spread out. Well, if it's really all right with you, Beryl. I'm only too glad to help, said Beryl rapidly. She wasted no time in rounding the corner to get out the door. Westervelt closed his eyes. He found it easy to envision Pauline tangling with her on the way out and causing Leidman to start all over again. The girls managed without any such catastrophe. Pauline headed for the swivel chair behind the unused secretarial desk. You ought to leave that door open, Leidman called to Beryl. If it should stick, there's hardly any air in there. You'd feel awfully cramped in no time. Thank you, said Beryl politely. She left the door open, sat down, and picked up Pauline's headset. From the set of her shoulders, it did not seem that much light conversation would be forthcoming from that quarter. Westervelt stepped further into the office and saw that Smith was standing in his own doorway, rubbing his large nose thoughtfully. The youth guessed that Simonetta had signaled him. Parrish cleared his throat with a little cough. Well, he said, I'll be in my office if anyone wants me. Rather than pass too close to Leidman, he retreated into the hall to use the outside entrance to his office. The ex-spacer paid no attention. Westervelt decided that he would be damned if he would go through Parrish's office and back into this one to get at his desk. He walked around the projection of the switchboard cubicle and sat down with a sigh at his own place. He leaned back and looked about to discover that Leidman had gone over to say a few words to Smith. Pauline glanced curiously from Westervelt to the two men, then began to shop among a shelf of magazines beside the desk of the vacationing secretary. After a few minutes, Leidman turned and went out the door. Westervelt tried to listen for footsteps, but the resilient flooring prevented him from guessing which way the ex-spacer had gone. He saw Smith approaching and went to meet him. I've changed my mind, said the chief. For a little bit, anyway. We'll leave him alone. He said he was sketching up some gizmo he wants to have built, and needed peace and quiet. Did he say we were talking too loud? Asked Westervelt, looking at the doorway rather than meet Smith's eye. No, that was all he said, answered Smith. There was a questioning undertone in his voice, but Westervelt chose not to hear it. After a short wait, Smith asked Simonetta to bring her taper into his office. He mentioned that he hoped to phone for some technical information. Westervelt watched them leave, then sank down on the corner of the desk at which Pauline was relaxing. Beryl turned around in her chair. Psst, Pauline, she whispered. Is he gone? They all left, except Willie, the girl told her. Beryl shut the door promptly. The pair left in the office heard her turn the lock with a brisk snap. What's the matter with her? Murmured Pauline. Nothing, said Westervelt glumly. Why don't you take a nap or something? I'd like to, said Pauline. It's going on 7 o'clock, and who knows when we'll get out of here. Shut up, said Westervelt. I mean, don't bring us bad luck by talking about it. Take a nap and let me think. All you big thinkers, jeered Pauline. What I'd really like to do is go down to the ladies' room and take a shower. But you always kid me about Mr. Parrish maybe coming in with fresh towels for the machine. I lied to you, Pauline, said Westervelt. The charwoman brings them. Well, I could always hope, giggled Pauline. Not tonight, said Westervelt. Believe me, kid, you're safer than you'll ever be. End of chapter 13. Of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in public domain. Pauline came back in a quarter of an hour, her youthfully translucent skin glowing and her ash-blonde curls rearranged. She glanced through the window at Beryl, who was nervously punching a number for an outside call. What's going on? She asked Westervelt, who sat with his heels on the center desk. Mr. Smith is calling a couple of engineers he knows, Simonetta told her. Westervelt had just heard it, when Simonetta had emerged with a tape to transcribe. He had started to mention that it might be better to phone a psychiatrist, but had bitten back the remark. For all I know, he reflected, they might take me away. Everything I remember about today can't really have happened. If it did, I wish it hadn't. He recalled that he had been phoned at home to hop a jet for London that morning. He had found the laboratory which had made the model of the light Smith was interested in, and been on his way back without time for lunch. Now that the jets were so fast, meals were no longer served on them, and he had had to grab a sandwich upon returning. Then there had been those poor fried eggs. That was all. No wonder he was feeling hungry again. I should have missed the return jet, he thought bitterly. I didn't know where I was well off. Why did I have to walk in there? I might have had the sense to go look in Bob's office first. He decided that Pauline, now chatting with Simonetta, looked refreshed and relaxed. Perhaps he ought to do the same. The idea, upon reflection, continued to appear attractive. Westervelt rose and walked out past the switchboard. Beryl was too busy to see him. He made his way quietly to the restroom, which he found empty. He was rather relieved to have avoided everyone. At one side of the room was a door leading to a shower. The appointments of Department 99 were at least as complete as those of any modern business office of the day. Westervelt stepped into a tiny anteroom, furnished with a skimpy stool, several hooks on the wall, and a built-in towel supplier. Prudently, he set the temperature for a hot shower on the dial outside the shower compartment and punched the button that turned on the water. Just in case all the trouble has affected the hot water supply, he thought. As he undressed, he was reassured by the sight of steam inside the stall. Another thought struck him. He locked the outer door. He did not care for the possibility of having Leidman imagine that he was trapped in here. It would be just his luck to be assisted out into the corridor, naked and dripping, at the precise moment it was full of staff members on their way to the laboratory. He slid back the partly opaque plastic doors and stepped with a sigh of pleasure under the hot stream. 10 minutes of it relaxed him to the point of feeling almost at peace with the world once more. I ought to finish with a minute or two of cold, he told himself, but to hell with it. I'll set the air on cool later. He pushed the waterproof button on the inside of the stall to turn off the water, opened the narrow doors, and reached out to the towel dispenser. The towel he got was fluffy and large, though made of paper. He blotted himself off well before turning on the air jets in the stall to complete the drying process. Having dressed and disposed of the towel through a slot in the wall, he glanced about to see if he had forgotten anything. The shower stall had automatically aired itself, sucking all moisture into the air conditioning system, and looked as untouched as it had at his entrance. Westervelt strolled out into the restroom proper, thankful that the lock in the anteroom door had not chosen that moment to stick. He stretched and yawned comfortably. Then he caught sight of his tousled, air-blown hair in a mirror. He fished in his pocket for coins and bought another hard paper comb and a small vial of hairdressing from dispensers mounted on the wall. He took his time spraying the vaguely perfumed mist over his dark hair and combing it neatly. That task attended to, he stole a few seconds to study the reflection of his face. It was rather more square about the jaw than Smith's, he thought, but he had to admit that the nose was prominent enough to challenge the chief's. No one had thought to equip the washroom with adjustable mirrors, so he gave up twisting his neck in an effort to see his profile. Well, that's a lot better, he said, with considerable satisfaction. Now if I can hook another coffee out of the locker, it will be like starting a new day. Gosh, I hope it's a better one, too. He walked lightly along the corridor to the main office, exaggerating the slight resilience of the floor to a definite bounce in his step. Outside the office, he met Beryl coming out. He felt himself coming down on his heels immediately. Beryl eyed him enigmatically, glanced over his shoulder to check that he was alone, and swung away toward the opposite wing. Westervelt hurried after her. "Look, Beryl," he called, "I wanted to say, that is, about before." Beryl turned the corner and kept walking. "Wait just a second," said Westervelt. He tried to get beside her, to speak to something besides the back of her blonde head, but she was a tall girl and had a long stride. He hesitated to take her by the elbow. Beryl stopped at the door to the library. "Please take note, Willie," she said coldly, "that the light is on inside, and I am all alone." At least she spoke, thought Westervelt. "I have come down here for a little peace and quiet," she informed him. "I hope you didn't intend to learn how to read at this hour of the night." "Oh, come on," protested Westervelt. "It was an accident. Could I help it?" "Being the way you are, I suppose not," admitted Beryl judiciously. "Why don't you go elsewhere and be an accident again?" "I'm trying to say I'm sorry," said Westervelt, feeling a flush spreading over his features. "I don't know why I have to apologize anyway. It wasn't me in there, filing away in the dark." Beryl looked down her nose at him, as if he were a Missourian asking where he could have his chlorine tank refilled. "Is that the story you're telling around?" she demanded icily. "I'm not telling—" Westervelt realized he was beginning to yell and lowered his voice. "I'm not telling any story around. Nobody knows anything about it, except you and I and Pete. Bob couldn't have seen anything." Beryl shrugged, a small, disdainful gesture. Westervelt wondered why he had allowed himself to get into an argument over the matter, since it was obvious that he was making things worse with every word. "I don't know why you should be so sore about it," he said. "Even Pete said to me I should forget about it." "Oh, you two have been talking it over," Beryl accused. "Pretty clubby. Do you take over for him on other things too?" Westervelt threw up his hands. "You don't seem to mind anything about it except that I should know you were in there with him," he retorted. "If he was so acceptable, why am I a disease? Nobody ever left this office on account of me, "It could happen yet," said Beryl. "Oh, hell. The trouble with you is you need a little loosening up." He grabbed her by the shoulders and yanked her toward him, slipping his left arm behind her back as she tried to kick his ankle. He kissed her. The result was spoiled by Beryl's turning her face away at the crucial instant. Westervelt drew back. The next thing he knew, lights exploded before his right eye. He had not seen her hand come up, or he would have ducked. He saw it as he stepped back, however. Despite a certain feminine delicacy, the hand clenched into a very capable little fist. Beryl took one quick stride into the library. "I don't like to keep hinting around," she said, "but maybe that will play itself back in your little mind." She slammed the door 3 inches from his nose. Westervelt raised a hand to open it, then changed his mind and felt gingerly of his eye. It hurt, but with a sort of surrounding numbness. Realizing that he could see after all, he looked up and down the corridor guiltily. It seemed very quiet. Right square in the peeper, he thought ruefully. She couldn't have aimed that well. It must have been a lucky shot. I ought to go in there and belt her. It was not something he really wanted to do. He could not foresee any pleasure or satisfaction in carrying matters to the extent of open war. "You lost again, Willie," he argued. "You might as well take it like a man. She got annoyed at something you said, like as not, and it was too late when you began." He prodded gently at his eye again and decided that the numb sensation was being caused by the tightening of skin over a growing mouse. He set off up the corridor, past the main door with his face averted, and hurried down to the washroom before someone should come along. Spying out the land through a cautiously opened door, he discovered the place unoccupied. In the mirror, the eyes showed definite signs of blossoming. The eyebrow was all right, but the orb itself was bloodshot and tearing freely. Beneath it, the flesh above the cheekbone was pink and puffy. "Oh my God," breathed Westervelt. "It'll be blue tomorrow. Probably purple and green, in fact. Or does it take a day or two to reach that stage?" He ran cold water into a basin and splashed it over his face, holding a palmful at a time against the damaged eye. When this did not seem sufficiently effective, he watered a soft paper towel, soaked it in water, and applied it until it lost its chill. "Am I doing right?" he wondered. "I can never remember whether it's hot or cold you're supposed to use." He thought about it while holding the slowly disintegrating towel to his eye. Someone had told him, as nearly as he could recall, that either way helped, depending on when heat or cold was applied. Keep the blood from going into the tissues. That must be it. But if you're too late for that, then heat would keep it from stiffening. Now the question is, did I start in time? He examined the eye. It did not feel too sore, but it was still red and slightly swollen. The flow of tears had stopped, so he decided there was little more he could do. He dried his face and walked out into the corridor, blinking. He went to the laboratory door and opened it quietly. The room was dark and unoccupied. Westervelt swore to himself that if he stumbled over anyone this time, he would punch every nose he could reach without further ado. Unless, he amended the intention, he ran into Leidman. He was squeamish about turning on a light, which left him the problem of groping his way through the maze of tables, workbenches, and stacks of cartons. He set down for future conversation the possibility of claiming that the department was as normal as any other business. It, too, possessed the typical messy back room out of range of the front office. He had negotiated about half the course when he felt a cool breeze. At first, he thought it must come from an air conditioning diffuser, but it blew more horizontally. Someone must have opened a window, he decided, or perhaps broken one trying out a dangerous instrument. He succeeded in reaching the far wall, where he felt around for the door leading to the communications room. This was over near the outside wall, but he reached it without bumping into more than 2 or 3 scattered objects. Once through the door, he could see better because a little light was diffused past the wire mesh enclosure around the power equipment. He walked along the short passage formed by this, turned a corner, and came in sight of Joe Rosencrantz sitting before his screen. "Hello, Joe," he greeted the operator. The other jumped perceptibly, looking around at the door. "It's Willie," said Westervelt. "I came around the other way." He was pleased to find that Rosencrantz had the room as dimly lighted as was customary among the TV men. Joe stared for a moment at him, and Westervelt feared that the other's vision was too well adjusted to the light. "I didn't think anybody but Leidman used that way much," said Rosencrantz. "It's a shortcut," said Westervelt evasively. He found a spare chair to sit in and inquired as to what might be new. Rosencrantz told him of putting through a few calls to planets near Trident, asking DIR men stationed on them to line up spaceships for possible use, either to go after Harris or to ship necessary equipment for plumbing the ocean. He offered to let Westervelt scan the tapes of his traffic. "That's a good idea," said the youth gratefully. "Even if I don't spot an opening, it will look like useful effort." "Yeah," agreed the other. "Time drags, doesn't it? Wonder how they're making out down in the cable tunnels." It can't last much longer. That's what this here Harris is saying too, I should think. Now there's one guy who was really packed away. Well, they've pulled some good ones around here, but I have a feeling about this one, insisted the operator. I'd bet 10 to 1 they won't spring Harris. Westervelt took the tapes to a playback screen and dragged his chair over. I told Smitty they ought to offer to swap for him, he said. At the time, I meant it looked like the perfect way to unload undesirables. Come to think of it, though, I wouldn't mind going myself. What the hell for? Asked Rosencrantz. Westervelt realized that he had nearly given himself away. Oh, just for the chance to see the place, he said. Nobody else has ever seen these Tridentians. How else could somebody like me get a position as an interstellar ambassador? Maybe Harris wants the job for himself. He sure went looking for it. The phone buzzed quietly. Rosencrantz answered it, then said, It's for you. Westervelt went to the screen. It was Smith. I thought you must have found a way out, Willie. Where did you get to? Westervelt explained that he was looking at the tapes of the Trident calls to familiarize himself with the background. I figured there was plenty of time for me to... He broke off as he saw Rosencrantz straighten up to focus in a call from space. Joe is receiving something right now. I'll let you know if it has anything to do with Trident. Department 99, Terra, the operator was saying when Westervelt turned from the phone, as if the mere call signal had not satisfied the party at the other end. Department 99, Terra. There seemed to be a lot of action on the screen. Men were running in various directions in what appeared to be a large hall with an impressive stairway. Yolene, Rosencrantz flung over his shoulder. Tell Smitty. Mr. Smith, said Westervelt, turning back to the phone screen. Joe says it's Yolene coming in. Maybe you'd like to see it yourself. Something looks wrong. Coming, said Smith, and the phone went dark. Westervelt looked around to see that most of the running figures had hidden themselves. A voice was coming over, and he listened with the operator. Knocked apart, so I have to use one of the observation lenses they have planted around the embassy. He's shooting up the place good. I'm taping until someone gets here, said Rosencrantz. Better tell me what happened, just in case. Yolene, thought Westervelt. That would be, let me see, Gerson, the kidnap case. Do they mean that he's shooting them up? And after he left me with this mess in the comm room, he headed for the stairs, said the voice of the unseen operator. He seems to be trying to get out of the embassy. We don't know why. The boys got him there without any trouble. Was he all right? Asked Rosencrantz, cocking an ear at the door. He looked pretty sick, as if he wasn't eating well, and he had a broken wrist. They took him along to the doctor with no trouble. Then the chief went up to see how he was and found Doc out cold on the floor. He set up a yell, naturally. Someone finally caught up with Gerson in the military attaché's office. What did he want there? Asked Rosencrantz. We don't know yet. He left a corpse for us that isn't answering questions. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. In the building to which the two Terrans had brought him, Gerson crouched behind the ornate balustrade edging the mezzanine. He was near the head of the stairway and hoped to get nearer. A look down the hall behind him showed no unwary heads in view. He studied the sections of the hall below, which he could see through the openings in the railing. There had been great scrambling about down there a moment earlier, so he was uneasy about showing himself. He had armed himself as chance provided, a rocket pistol of Yolinite manufacture, doubtless purchased as a souvenir, and a sharp knife from a dinner tray he had come upon in one of the rooms he had searched. Because of his injury, he had to grip the knife between his teeth. Something bothered him about this arrangement. He had the papers thrust in his shirt. He held the rocket pistol in one hand. One hand was hurt, yet the only way left to hold the knife was in his teeth. It did not seem exactly right, but he had had no time to ponder. The Terrans were keeping him busy. Since he had been brought to this building, he had seen 4 threes of Terrans. One, the medical worker, he had rendered helpless. Then he had gone to search for secrets, and that other one had seen him. By that time, he had found the rocket pistol. He had left that Terran dead, but others had come running. Something had told him to shoot up the communications equipment, although the Terran working it had escaped. He was somewhere behind Gerson, behind one of the many doors leading off that high, bright corridor. He believed that he had seen one other duck into a doorway ahead of him, along the hall on the other side of the mezzanine. There was yet another hiding behind the opposite balustrade. Gerson wondered idly if the last one was armed. He tried to review the probable positions of those on the main floor. One had definitely run out the front door, which faced the bottom of the broad stairway about 30 feet away. There was a shallow anteroom there, but Gerson had seen him all the way across it. Of the others, one had ducked into a chamber at the front of the main hall, to Gerson's left as he would be descending the stairs. Another had run back under cover of the stairway on the same side, and the remaining 4 were looking somewhere to the right, either behind the stairs or in adjoining chambers. He leaned closer to the balustrade in an effort to see more. In the act, his injured limb came into contact with the barrier and made him grimace in pain. The drug the Terran medical worker had shot into it was wearing off. Since he had made a slight noise already, Gerson crawled along about 10 feet until he was just beside the head of the stairs. He made himself quiet to listen. Somewhere below, 2 of the embassy staff were talking cautiously. It might be a good time to catch them unawares. He rose and took a step toward the stairs. A voice that sounded artificially loud spoke in one or another of the lower chambers. It had a slight echo, making it nearly impossible for Gerson to determine the direction. The Terran who had ducked into the room on the left appeared, raising a weapon of some kind. Gerson blazed a rocket in his direction. The slim missile, the length and thickness of the 2 top joints of his thumb, left a smoky trail just above the stairway railing and blew a large hole in the wall beside the doorway where the staff man had been standing. Somehow the fellow had leaped back in time to avoid the flying speck of metal and plaster. Gerson knelt behind the balustrade again, shaken by the sense of new pain, and wondering at its source. He concentrated. After a moment he felt the wetness trickling down his left side. Some small object had grazed the flesh, and he realized that it must have been a solid pellet projected by the weapon of the Terran at whom he had shot. He knew that the Terrans had more dangerous weapons than that, but had been confident that they would dare nothing over-violent here within their own building. The pistol used against him must be an old-fashioned one, or a keepsake. Possibly it was a mock weapon built for practicing at a target. He seemed to remember vaguely having handled such a thing in the past. He strained after the fleeting memory, clenching his teeth with the effort, but it was gone. So many memories seemed to be gone. All he was sure of was that he must get out of here with those papers. He checked the upper hall again, before and behind. He looked across the open space for the Terran hiding like himself behind the balustrade, but could not find him. It might or might not be worthwhile to send a shot over there at random. If he missed, he might at least scare the fellow. The loud voice with a mechanical sound to it blared out from below. "Gerson," it called. "Gerson, throw down your weapon and stand up. We can see where you are. We want to help you." Gerson showed no reaction. Analyzing the statement, he reminded himself that one Terran had shot him. Not very seriously, it was true, but it was not in the nature of help. Either the voice lied, or it had no control over the individual who had fired at him. He did not blame it for the presumable untruth, since he was not deceived by it. It would not be preferable to kill the man who had shot him, but he must bear in mind that his main task was to get out of the building. "Gerson," called the voice again, "we know you are injured. You are a sick man. We beg you to drop your weapon and let us help you." Gerson wondered what the voice meant by the expression sick. It was possible that someone had seen him wounded by the last shot, or did they mean his sore limb? The Terran he had killed back along the corridor had flung a small ceramic dish at him, and Gerson had been slow in raising his injured limb to block it. The whole side of his face was sore, but the skin of his cheek no longer bled, so it was a matter of opinion whether he was sick on that account. The voice must mean the last wound, when it called him sick. That meant that the Terran he had shot at was the voice, or that there was another Terran in the room with him. Gerson did not think that any of the others could have seen. Some doubt at the back of his mind struggled to suggest an oversight, but he knew of none. He peered once more between the balusters, and this time he saw a motion, a mere shadow across the way. Instantly he stood up and launched a rocket at the spot. It streaked on its way and exploded immediately against one of the uprights. Gerson regretted fleetingly that it had not gone through and struck against the wall beyond, which would have accounted for the skulking Terran with a good deal of certainty. As the baluster disintegrated, leaving stubs at top and bottom, Gerson started down the stairs. Yells sounded from below. He threw one leg up to mount the stair railing, leaned back along it, and let himself slide. The rocket pistol waving wildly at arm's length in his left hand helped him balance. He reached the landing at the middle of the stairs in one swoop. The human at whom he had shot reappeared in the same doorway. Gerson rolled to his left, felt both feet hit upon the landing, and let go another missile. It was too late. The Terran had not even lingered to fire back. It seemed almost like a feint to distract. "Gerson!" blared the mechanical voice. "Gerson! Gerson!" shouted other voices. They came from many directions, and he was unable to comprehend them all. He reached a point near the bottom of the stairway, running 3 steps at a time, when a louder yell directed his attention to the doorway on his right. Without breaking his stride, he whipped his left hand across his body and fired a rocket. He had a glimpse of the figure dodging aside before the smoke and dust of the explosion told him he had nicked the edge of the doorway. It seemed to him that he must have shot the Terran as well, and he let his eye linger there an instant as he reached the floor of the hall. Thus he saw the figure reappear and was in position to fling 2 more shots with animal quickness. The figure was blown straight backwards this time, but Gerson had time to realize that there had been no head on it when it had been thrust out. His first shot must have done that. All told, he had wasted 3 missiles on a dummy. Then the loop of rope fell about him, and he knew why he had been lured into facing this direction. He tried to bring the rocket pistol to bear on the 3 Terrans running at him from behind the stairway. The 4th, at the end of the rope, heaved Gerson off his feet. He crashed down upon his sore limb, letting out a groan at the impact. One of the runners dove headlong at him, batting at the pistol as he slid past on the polished floor. Gerson felt the weapon knocked out of his grasp. It rattled and scraped along the floor out of reach, but he kicked the one who had done it in the head. 2 of the Terrans were trying to hold him down now. He got the knife from his mouth into his left hand, let a Terran see it, then bit him viciously on the wrist. The Terran let go, and Gerson found it simple to knee the remaining one in the groin. He rolled over to get a knee under him, pushed himself up with a fist gripping the knife, and saw Terrans running at him from all directions. One of them had a broad, white bandage on his head. Gerson recognized him as the medical worker. The men carried a hypodermic syringe. Unreasoning terror swept through Gerson. He knew that he must, at all costs, avoid that needle. He whirled around to slash at the men coming up behind him. The nearest fell back warily. "Put it away, Gerson," he said. "We don't want to hurt you, man. Why, you're half dead on your feet." "What's the matter?" asked another, more softly. "We can see that you're not normal. What did those bastards do to you?" Gerson looked from side to side, seeing them closing in, but unable to spot an opening for a charge. "Just listen to me a minute," said the medical worker. He made the mistake of holding the hypodermic out of sight this time. Too late. "Gerson, talk to me. Say something. Whatever the trouble is, we'll help you." It was the only opening. Gerson took a careful, hesitant step toward him, then another. He held up his damaged limb. "Yes, your wrist is broken," said the Terran. "I was going to put a cast on it for you, remember? Now just relax, and we'll take care of—" He saw Gerson's eyes and leaped back. The knife swept up in a vicious arc that would have disemboweled him. Without wasting the motion, Gerson slashed down and left at another as he plunged forward. The point grazed an upflung arm, drawing a startled curse from the victim. "Tackle him," shouted one of the Terrans. "Careful, he's already hurt bad enough," cautioned another. Gerson tried to feint and throw his weight in the opposite direction, but his legs would not obey him. He recovered from the slip only to have one of the men push him from behind. Someone clamped a tight hold on his left arm as he staggered. A moment later they twisted the knife out of his grasp and bore him to the floor. He kicked ineffectively and then caught one of them by surprise with a butt. The man recoiled, blood spurting already from his nose. He brought his fist around despite warning yells and clipped Gerson on the temple. "Hold him, damn it," shouted someone. "Get that rope over here. Do you want to kill him? Just hold him still." "You try it," invited one of those holding Gerson pinned. "I think he's weakening," said another. "Watch out, he may be playing possum." The talk seemed to come from far away. Gerson felt them tie his ankles together. They hesitated about his hands. One was injured. One voice suggested tying his left wrist to the stairway railing, but it was decided that they could watch him well enough as long as he could not run. The weight lessened as those pinning him arose to look to their own bruises. Gerson was vaguely surprised to discover that all of them were off him. He still felt as if great weight were holding him pressed against the floor. He found it difficult to catch his breath. They had taken the papers from his shirt, he noted. One of the Terrans passed them to a man in a dark uniform, who began to leaf through them worriedly. A Terran came in through the front door. "Have you got him?" the newcomer asked. "That helicopter is still floating around up there. I've been watching it for half an hour with the night glasses. They sure as hell are waiting for something, and there isn't anyone else in this neighborhood they could be interested in," said a deeper voice. "Well, McLean, what did you let him get his hands on from your secret file?" Gerson rolled over quietly and started to drag himself along the floor. He'd actually moved a yard before they noticed him. They were gentle about turning him on his back again. The discussion about the papers was dropped while the medical worker cut his shirt away from the bleeding wound in his side. Hushed comments were made, but Gerson paid no attention. He was concerned with the fact that one of the Terrans had planted a foot between his legs, above the rope around his ankles, so that he was quite securely anchored to the spot. "Looks like a broken rib besides," said the Terran, examining him. "Do you think we could get him upstairs?" "I'm no doctor," said the deeper voice, "but even I can see you'd never make it in time." The voice came closer, though the vision in Gerson's eyes was blurring. "Tell me, boy, what happened? How did they make you do it? What do they want?" "Gerson," said the man in the dark uniform, "did you know what you were after when you took these papers?" He was a dark blur to Gerson, who felt as if the weight on his chest had been increased. His lips were dry. He thought it would be nice to have a little water, but could not find words to ask. The deep voice was flinging a question at the dark blur. "Why, no, sir," said the Terran with the papers. "Nothing important at all. Just a few old shipping lists. A record of the planetary motions in this system that anybody could obtain, and an article on shortcuts to learning the Yolanite language. I think I had the batch lying around the top of my desk. Why did he take them? Someone asked. Damned if I know. You fellas had me scared to death. From what you said, I thought he might have pinched the deadly top-secret code and my personal address book to boot. Simmons, shouted the deeper voice. Are you getting this? Are you making a tape for Terra? Oh, right out, eh? Scrambled, I hope. It's not the kind of thing to publicize to the galaxy. The mechanical voice boomed in the background. Gerson paid it no attention. He felt the doctor's hands touching the old injections and heard the man swearing. Whoever was holding his left arm was actually squeezing and stroking his hand. The taste of failure was in his mouth. That's what they must have started with, said the doctor. In the end, they put an awful mental twist into him. Poor guy. I told you they were up to something, said the dark blur. Those little bastards had big ideas. But they won't catch us napping with any more spies, conditioned or not. Now maybe they'll read my reports on Terra. Gerson opened his mouth to breathe better. He rolled his head from side to side on the hard floor. Somewhere deep inside him, a little silent voice was crying, frightened. He had failed, and there would be no other chance. The little voice took leave of its fear to laugh. They had not let him remember how to read. And so he died, a tall, battered Terran lying on a hard floor, and grinning faintly up at the men who had helped him die.
End of chapter 15. Of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
Chapter 16. In the communications room of Department 99, Westervelt could actually hear people around him breathing, so hushed was the gathering. Someone was leaning on his shoulder, but he was reluctant to attract attention by moving. Static sounds and the clicking and humming of various mechanisms about the room suddenly became unnaturally noticeable. Glancing this way and that, he discovered that the entire staff had drifted in during the transmission from Yolene. There were at least 2 people behind him, to judge by the breathing and the weight on his shoulder. So intense had been the excitement that he did not remember anyone but Smith arriving. He saw better to the left than to the right and became conscious of his eye again. Westervelt had drawn up his chair behind and to the left of the operator, and Smith had perched himself on the end of a table behind Joe. Beside the chief stood Simonetta, with Beryl behind her. Parrish was to Westervelt's left, so he concluded that Leidman and Pauline must be behind him. The grip on his right shoulder felt small to be Leidman's, but he could not see down at the necessary angle because of the puffiness under his eye. The broad-shouldered, stocky man on the screen moved to the stairway and looked up, straight into their eyes. "Is this still going out to Terra, Simmons?" he asked. He had dark hair, with a crinkly wave in it, which permitted him to appear less disheveled than the men about him or standing over the body of Gerson. He pulled out a large white handkerchief to wipe the streaming perspiration from his face. "Yes, sir," answered the voice of the distant operator. "You're looking right into the concealed pickup. I'll switch the audio from Terra to the loudspeaker system, and you can talk to them." Westervelt glanced at the other men in the embassy on Yolene. Several of them obviously suffered from minor injuries. All of them wore expressions of tragedy. One man in his shirt sleeves was standing with his shoulders against the base of the stairway, head thrown well back, trying to staunch the flow of blood from his nose. Another, with his back to the lens, knelt beside the body of Gerson. A couple of others, looking helpless, were lighting cigarettes. "I suppose you saw the end of it," the man on the stairs said. Smith cleared his throat and leaned over Joe Rosencrantz's shoulder. "We saw," he answered. Is there any doubt that he's dead?" The men on the stairs looked to the group around the body. The doctor shook his bandaged head sadly. "As much from strain and exhaustion as anything else," he reported. "The man belonged in a hospital, but some uncanny conditioning drove him on. In the end, his heart gave out." The stocky man turned back to the lens. "You heard that. Except for one man who didn't know at the time what was going on, we did the best we could. I'm Delaney, by the way, in charge here." Smith identified himself and agreed that Gerson had looked to be unmanageable. "Do you think you can find what they used?" he asked. "I gather that you never got anything out of him since the time you picked him up. Did that part of it go according to plan?" "Oh, yes," said Delaney. "We even got back the little torch we sent him, the way you plotted for us. It looked used, too. But now I'm wondering if they let him cut his way out." "I wouldn't doubt it," said Smith gloomily. "I'm afraid we didn't look very bright on this one. We seem to have underestimated the Yolenites badly. There isn't too much information on them available here." "Nor here, to tell the truth," said Delaney. "Which reminds me, our Captain McLean has been after me for a long time to put more pressure on the DIR about that. Could you duplicate your tape and send them a copy? It would save us another transmission, and you might like to add your own comments." Smith promised to have it done. He also offered, to soothe Captain McLean, to send an extra copy to the Space Force. There seemed to be nothing more to say. The scene on the screen blanked out as the distant operator spoke to Rosencrantz on audio only from his own shot-up office. Then it was over. Westervelt, aware that the pressure on his shoulder was gone, looked around. Leidman had his arm about a shaken Pauline. The ex-spacer's expression was blank, but the hardness of his eyes made the youth shiver. For a second, he thought he detected a slight resemblance to the man who had come bounding down the stairs on Yolene, leaving crisscross trails of rocket smoke in the air. That's crazy, he thought the next instant. And he lost the resemblance. He blinked, fingered his tender eye, and looked around at the others. Everyone was subdued, staring at the blank and quiet receiver or at the floor. Westervelt was surprised to see that Beryl was crying. She raised a forefinger to scrub the tears from her cheek. Hesitantly, Westervelt took the neatly folded handkerchief from his breast pocket and held it out. Beryl scrubbed the other cheek, looked at the handkerchief without raising her eyes to his, and accepted it. She blotted her eyes, examining the cloth, and whispered, "Sorry, Willie. I think I got makeup on it." Smith stirred uncomfortably at the whisper. He stood up and spoke one short word with a depth of emotion. Then he kicked the leg of the table to relieve his feelings. Rosencrantz swiveled around in his chair, waiting to see if any other calls were to be made. Smith took a deep breath. "You'll make copies of the tape when you can, Joe?" "Sure," said the operator sympathetically. "Well," said Leidman, at the rear of the group, "that's another one lost. Tomorrow we'll open a permanent file on Yolene, as Pete suggests." "Yes, I imagine they'll give us more business," agreed Parrish. Leidman growled. "I'll give them the business next time," he threatened. "Well, that kind of damps the pile for tonight. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm in no mood now to be clever." Smith straightened up abruptly. Now, wait a minute," he spluttered. "I mean, we all feel pretty low, naturally. Still, this wasn't the main... Serious as this was, we were trying to push on this other case, to get a start anyway." Here we go again, thought Westervelt. Shall I try to trip him up if anything happens? Or shall I just get out of the way? He recalled the man in the embassy on Yolene, holding a stained handkerchief to his bloody nose, and measured the size of his own with the tip of a forefinger. On the other hand, if there should be a melee, it would certainly cover a little item like a puffy eye. He wondered if he would have the guts to poke out his head at the proper instant, and was rather afraid that he would. Parrish was murmuring about sticking to the job in hand, trying to support Smith without arousing the antagonism of an open argument. Leidman seemed unconvinced. "Why don't we all have a round of coffee?" suggested Simonetta. "If we can just sit down a few minutes and pull ourselves together." Smith looked at her gratefully. "Yes," he said, "that's the least we can do, Bob. This was a shock to us all, but the girls felt it more. I don't believe any of them wants to hit the street all shaken up like this. Right, Si?" "I would like to sit down somewhere," said Simonetta. "Here," exclaimed Westervelt, leaping up. He had forgotten that he had been rooted to the chair since before the others had crept into the room during the transmission from Yolene. "Never mind, Willie," Simonetta said. "I didn't mean I was collapsing. Come on, Beryl, let's see if there's any coffee or tea left." "Wait for me," said Pauline. "I've got to take this phone off the outside line anyway." Smith stepped forward to plant one hand behind Leidman's shoulder blade. "I could use a martini myself," he called after the girls. "How about the rest of you? Pete? Willie?" Paris seconded the motion. Westervelt said he would be right along and trailed them slowly to the door. He paused to look back, and he and Joe exchanged brow-mopping gestures. The rest of them were trooping along the corridor without much talk. He ambled along until the men, bringing up the rear, had turned the corner. Then he ducked into the library. He fingered his eye again. Either it was a trifle less sore, or he was getting used to it. He still hesitated to face an office full of people and good lighting. "There must be something around here to read," he muttered. He walked over to a stack of current magazines. Most of them were technical in nature, but several dealt with world and galactic news. He took a few steps to his seat at the long table and began to leaf through one. It must have been about 15 minutes later that Simonetta showed up, bearing a sealed cup of tea and one of coffee. "So that's where you are," she said. "I was taking something to Joe, and thought maybe I'd find you along the way." Westervelt deduced that she had phoned the operator. "You can have the coffee," she said, setting it beside his magazine. "Joe said he'd rather have tea this time around." Westervelt looked up. Simonetta saw his eye and pursed her lips. "Well." "How does it look?" asked Westervelt glumly. "Kind of pretty. If I remember the ones my brothers used to bring home, it will be ravishingly beautiful by tomorrow." "That's what I was afraid of," said Westervelt. Simonetta laughed. She set the tea aside and pulled out a chair. "I don't think it's really that bad, Willie," she told him. "I was only fooling." "It shows, though, huh?" "Oh, yes, it shows." "That's what I like about you, Si," said Westervelt. But you don't ask nasty, embarrassing questions like how it happened or which door closed on me. Following which, he told her nearly the whole story, leaving out only the true origin of the quarrel. He suspected that Simonetta could put two and two together, but he meant to tell nobody about the start of it. "Oh, Willie," she said with a grin at the conclusion. "If you had to fall for a blonde, why couldn't you pick little Pauline?" "I guess you're right." "Now don't take that so seriously, too. Beryl's a good sort, on the whole. In a day or two this will all blow over. Come on with me to see Joe. Then we'll go back and say you got something in your eye." "But when?" "Oh, during the message from Yolene. You didn't want to bother anybody at the time, so you foolishly kept rubbing it until he got sore." "That's all right," said Westervelt. "But Beryl knows different." "If she opens her mouth, I shall personally punch her in the eye," declared Simonetta. She giggled at the idea, and he found himself grinning. They went along the corridor to deliver the tea to Rosencrantz, and then returned to the main office. An air of complete informality prevailed, a reaction from the scene they had witnessed. There was a good deal of wandering about with drinks, sitting on desks, and inconsequential chatter. No one seemed to want to talk shop, and Westervelt guessed that Smith was just as pleased to be able to kill some time. He himself quietly slipped around the corner to his own desk, where he propped his heels up and sipped his coffee. Westervelt listened as Parrish and Smith told a few jokes. The stories tended to be more ironic than funny, and no one was expected to laugh out loud. Pauline from her switchboard buzzed the phone on Simonetta's desk, since most of those present had gravitated to the end of the office. Smith looked around in the middle of an account of his struggles with his radio-controlled lawnmower. "Want to take that, Willie?" he said with a bare suggestion of a wink. Westervelt lifted a hand in assent. He climbed out of his chair and went to the phone on Beryl's desk, where he would be as nearly private as possible. "Who is it, Pauline?" he asked when she came on. "It's Joe. He wants to talk to Mr. Smith." "Give it here on number 7, said Westervelt. "The boss is talking." Pauline blanked out and was replaced by the communications man. Rosencrantz showed a flicker of surprise at the sight of Westervelt. "Smitty's in a crowd," murmured the youth. "Something up?" "Not much, maybe," said the other. "A message came in by commercial TV. I guess they didn't think it was too urgent, but I'll give you the facts if you think Smitty would like to know." "Hold on," said Westervelt. "Let's see, where does Beryl keep a pen?" He dug out a scratch pad and something to scribble with and nodded. "One of our own agents," said Joe. "Named Robertson. Signed this. You've seen his reports, I guess." "Yeah, sounds familiar. It says, after reading between our standard code expressions, that 2 spacers and a tourist were convicted of inciting revolution on Epsilon ND2. They gave the names and all, which I taped." "That's practically in our backyard," said Westervelt. "Maybe he just wants to alert us, but the DIR ought to be working on that publicly." "Sure there wasn't any hint it was urgent?" "No, and like I said, it came by commercial relay." "Okay, the boss has enough on his mind at the moment. Let's figure on having a tape for him to look at in the morning. I'll find a chance to mention it to him, so he'll know about it. All right?" "All right with me," grinned Rosencrantz. "If anything goes wrong, I'll refer them to you. Be prepared to have your other eye split in." He cut off, leaving Westervelt with his mouth open and his regained aplomb shaky. The youth waited until he caught Smith's eye, and shook his head to indicate the unimportance of the call. He wondered if he ought to take time to phone downstairs for a report on the situation. It did not strike him as worth the risk with all the people in the same room. He saw Beryl strolling his way and rose from her chair. "That's all right, Willie," she said calmly, setting her packaged drink on the desk. "I just wanted to give you back your handkerchief." She produced it from the purse lying on her desk and said, "Thanks again. I'm sorry about the makeup marks." "Forget it," said Westervelt. "I'm sorry about the eye, too," said Beryl, raising her eyes for the first time to examine the damage. "It doesn't look as bad as Cy said." "Well, that's a comfort, anyway. I got something in it and rubbed it too hard, you know." "Yes, she told me," said Beryl. "To tell the truth, Willie, I didn't know I could do it." "Ah, it was a lucky swing," muttered Westervelt. "Yes, well, you might say I was a little upset." "I'm sorry I started it all," said Westervelt. "How about letting me buy you a lunch to make up?" Beryl shrugged, looking serious. "I don't mind, if we make it Dutch. It was as much my fault. I hope we're both around to go to lunch tomorrow. It gives me the creeps." "What does?" asked Westervelt. "The way Mr. Leidman looks. Something about his eyes." Westervelt turned his head to stare across the room, wondering if the worst had occurred. End of chapter 16. Of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. John Willard set a brisk pace through the streets of First Haven, as befitted a conscientious public servant,
Maria Ringstad kept up with him as best she could. When she lagged, the thin cord tightened around her wrist, and he grumbled over his shoulder at her. Naturally, she carried her bag. He had explained that they would have been most inconspicuous with her walking properly a yard behind him. Anyone would then have taken them for a man and wife, or a man and servant, had it not been for her Terran clothing. To walk the street with you in that rig would attract entirely too much attention, was his explanation. The only thing we can do is use the public symbol of restraint, so that everyone will know you are a prisoner. What good will that do? Won't they still stare? It is considered improper as well as imprudent. No law-abiding citizen would wish to risk being suspected of a sympathetic curiosity about a transgressor. You make it sound dangerous, said Maria, holding out her hand obediently. Anything to be inconspicuous, she had thought. Now, turning a corner about 300 yards from the jail, she had to admit that the system seemed to be working. The greenies whom they met were nearly all interested in other things. A shop in the vicinity, another greenie across the street, a paving stone over which they had just tripped, or the condition of the wall above Maria's head. Willard led her to the far side of a broader avenue after they had negotiated the corner that put them permanently out of sight of the jail. Maria tried to recall the scanty information he had whispered to her against the outside wall of the prison. There had been time for him to tell her he was sent by the Department of Interstellar Relations of Terra to get her out, since it had proved impossible to alter the attitude of the greenie legal authorities. Maria was not quite sure whether he was really the prison officer he said he was, in which case he must have been bribed on a scale to make her own crime ridiculous, or whether he was an independent worker friendly to the Terran space line, in which case the payment might more charitably be regarded as a fee. She knew that he planned to deliver her to a spaceship due to leave shortly. There had been no opportunity for her to ask the destination. To tell the truth, she reflected, I don't care what it is. Anything would be a haven from Greenhaven. She began to amuse herself by planning the article she would write when back on Terra. How I Escaped from Paradise might do it, or Prison Breaking in Paradise, or perhaps Green Haven or Green Hell. Whatever I call it, she promised herself, I'll skin them alive, and I'll find a way to send the judge and the warden copies of it too. Maybe, she pondered, it might even be better to stretch it out to a whole book, and get someone to do a series of unflattering cartoons of greeny characters. The cord jerked at her wrist. She realized that she had fallen behind again, and made an apologetic face at Willard when he looked back. Don't do that, he hissed. They'll wonder why I tolerate disrespect. Sorry, said Maria, shrugging unrepentantly. You take this pretty seriously, don't you? You'd better take it seriously yourself, he growled. It's your neck as much as mine. He glared at a young greenie who had glanced curiously from the opposite side of the avenue. The abashed citizen hastily averted his eyes. Willard gave the cord a significant twitch and strode on. They turned another corner, to the right this time, and went along a narrow side street for about 200 yards. Waiting for a moment when he might meet as few people as possible, Willard crossed to the other side. A little further on, he led the way into what could almost be termed an alley. Willard stopped. Now we are going into the small food shop, he informed Maria. You would call it a cafe or restaurant on Terra. It will seem normal enough for an officer to provide his charge with food for a journey, so that will be reasonable. Is the food any better than what I've been getting? Asked Maria. It doesn't matter. We won't stop there, since it would be impolite to inflict the sight of you upon honest citizens at their meal. I shall request a private room, and the keeper will lead us to the rear. Humph. Well, if that's the way it is, then that's the way it is. So in the eyes of an honest greenie, I'm something to spoil his appetite? What can I do about that? What you can do is keep that big, flexible, active mouth of yours shut, declared Willard. Otherwise, I shall simply drop the end of the cord and take off. You can find your own way out. I'm sorry, apologized Maria, a shade too meekly. I promise I'll be oh so good. Do you want me to kneel down and lick your boots? Or will it be enough if I open a vein in the soup? It will be enough if I get out of this without committing murder, mumbled Willard. Now the expression is fine. Just wipe that grin off your mind and we'll go in. He pulled her along the few yards to the entrance of the food shop. He opened the door and entered. Maria followed at a respectful distance. There were a half a dozen greenies eating plain, wholesome meals at plain, sturdy tables and exchanging a plain, honest word now and then. The sight of the cord on Maria's wrist counterbalanced the sight of her lascivious Terran costume, and they kept their eyes on their food after one startled glance. A greenie woman stood at a counter at one side of the food shop, and Willard made known his desire for a private dining room. A man cooking something that might have been stew looked around from his labor at a massive but primitive stove to the rear of the counter. Maria thought he took an unusual interest in her compared to what she had been observing recently. It rather helped her morale, and she thought she did not blame the man if the counter woman were his wife. The latter now came from behind her little fortress and led the way to a door at the rear of the shop. Willard followed, and Maria trailed along, restraining an impulse to wink at the cook. She was conscious of his analytical stare until the door had closed behind her. Willard seemed to have nothing to say to the greenie woman, and Maria relented to the point of heeding his request to be silent. All this made for a solemn little procession. They walked along a short hall, and the greenie woman opened another door to a flight of stairs. What surprised Maria was that the stairs led down. She shrugged. On Greenhaven, they had their own peculiar ways. She was more puzzled when, at the bottom of the steps, they seemed to be in an ordinary cellar. The light was dim, and she did not succeed in catching the look on Willard's face. She began to wonder if she might wind up buried under a basement floor while he spent his ill-gotten bribe. Then the greenie woman pulled aside a large crate and opened another door. To pass through this one, they all had to stoop. Maria realized that they were then in the cellar of another building. The blocks of stone forming the walls looked damp and dirty. They proceeded to climb stairs again, and to traverse another hall. Maria thought they ended up going in a direction away from the street. The woman led them through a small, dark series of rooms, and finally into one with windows set too high in the walls to see out. There she halted and faced Willard. The greenie prison official dropped the cord and reached into an inner pocket of his drab uniform. He withdrew a thick packet of Greenhaven currency. The numbers and units were too unfamiliar for Maria to guess at the value from one quick glance, but the attitude of their hostess suggested that it was substantial. Willard handed it over. Maria decided it was time to set down her bag. The woman went immediately to a large chest in a corner of the room and opened it. She set aside a mirror she took out of the chest, then began to pull out other objects. There was a case which she handed to Willard, and a great many articles of clothing that were probably considered feminine on this world. "The point is," Willard said in low tones, "you are going to have proper clothes to look natural on the street. See if that dress will fit you." Maria took the thing distastefully, but it looked to be about the right length when she held it up against her. The greenie woman nodded. She added a sort of full-length flannel slip and a petticoat to the dress. "Now I know why the greenie women look so grim," said Maria. "It would be almost worth dying to stay out of such a rig." "Hold your tongue," said Willard. Maria made a face. "Present company accepted, of course," she added. "Change," ordered Willard. "We have no time to waste." He took the mirror in a small case to a rude table under one of the windows. He opened the box so that Maria caught a glimpse of the contents, which looked like an actor's makeup kit. The greenie woman joggled Maria's elbow and spoke for the first time. "I must not be long, or it will be noticed," she hinted. "Give her your clothes to burn and get into the others," said Willard, bending over the table with his back to her. "As soon as I get myself fixed here, I'll change your face too." Maria looked about in a manner to suggest that she hoped they knew what they were doing. The greenie woman waited. Maria reached up and began to unbutton her blouse. She dropped it across her bag. The woman picked both of them up and waited. She looked a trifle shocked at the sight of the thin slip when Maria unzipped her skirt and hauled it over her head. By the time the slip followed, she was standing with downcast eyes. Maria eyed the broad back in the drab uniform as she unfastened her brasserie. This would make a good story someday, but to tell it in the wrong company might be to invite catty remarks about her attractiveness. She could think of other men who might not have kept their backs so rigidly turned as did Willard. It was almost provocative. She slipped down the brief panties, stepped out of them, and handed them over. The greenie woman pointed silently to the shoes. Maria kicked them off, and they were added to the pile. She hoped that whatever was in the chest for footwear would not be too hard to walk in. The greedy woman thrust the flannel atrocity at her and left the room hastily. Maria watched the door close softly, then held the garment out at arm's length. It did not look any better. She took a few steps toward Willard. "I bet I could make him faint dead away," she thought mischievously. "I'd love to see the look on his face if... Well, why not? I will." "She's gone," she announced in a low voice. "How do I get into this thing?" Willard looked around, and the look was nothing she had ever seen before. His face appeared fuller in the cheeks. His eyebrows were black and heavy, his nose high at the bridge, and his whole complexion was darker. He nodded at her gasp. "Those papers I turned in for you won't last too long. The estimate is that they will dissolve before tomorrow morning, but that this might come apart sooner. If he sends out an alarm, I don't want to be on the streets in shape to be recognized." "That's wonderful," said Maria enthusiastically. "Are you going to make me up, too?" "Yes," said Willard. "Get into those things so I can start." Maria watched his eyes flicker to her breasts, and then sweep down the rest of her body. She thought he was taking it very well, unless it was the makeup. "Will you help me with this thing?" she begged. "I never saw one before." She held out the flannel garment with a helpless smile, planting the other hand on her bare hip. "Will you quit teasing, you little bitch?" Willard snapped. "I'm no greenie, if that's what you thought. You could get us involved to the point of missing the ship." Maria felt her eyes popping. A tingling hot flush lit her face. It spread back to her neck and crept down to her breasts. She snatched the flannel sack to her and turned her back. Somehow she maneuvered it over her head. Then she fumbled on the starched petticoat and topped the hole with a dun-colored dress that fell chastely about her ankles. Willard handed her a pair of low-heeled shoes that were only a little loose when she put them on. He had her stand facing one of the windows while he darkened her face and put a black wig on her. She looked up at the window and stood very still. "Now listen," said Willard. "You'll absolutely have to stop blushing like that, or the color of the skin is going to come all wrong." "I can't help it," she said meekly. Then she saw he was laughing at her, and gave him a rueful smile. "Where did all that modesty come from?" "It was the shock, I suppose." "All right, it was funny. When we get out on the street again, forget all about what's funny. Look like a serious greenie." "Funny?" objected Maria. "I always thought I made a pretty fair showing in comparison to local gals." "Oh, you did. You did. One of the best showings I've ever seen." He pressed a hand to each side of her waist, then slid them up her ribs until the weight of her breasts rested against his wrists. "We'll talk about this again when we make it to the ship," he told her in a low voice. "Right now it would be foolish to spoil this makeup." He turned away after a long moment and returned the kit to the chest. They left by the same door by which they had entered, but Willard knew a short way out to a different street. Maria thought it must be the one outside the high windows. He set off at a businesslike pace. They traveled about a quarter of a mile, counting several turns by which he sacrificed directness for sparsely peopled streets. The disguises must have been effective, for they drew no second glances. It was not until she saw the gibbet that Maria realized they were approaching the outskirts of the city. "What?" she began, sensing the reality of her plight for the first time. "Quiet! Look the other way if you must, but don't be obvious about it." Several examples of rigid Greenhaven justice were on exhibit to a modest crowd. 3 men and 2 women sat in stocks. They were not, apparently, subject to rock throwing or other abuse, as Maria seemed to remember had been the custom on ancient Terra. But they were clearly unhappy and mortified. From the gibbet behind them swung the body of a hanged man. It appeared to have been there for some time. Maria wondered what he had done to corrupt the morals or the economics of Greenhaven. What nearly made her sick was the sight of a party of 24 children being guided on a tour of the place. One youngster whined and was thoroughly cuffed by the greenie in charge. Then they were passed, and Maria saw the high cyclone fence of the Terran spaceport. Willard took a look at her face. Seemingly satisfied, he explained that they had come to a section well away from the main entrance. He had her along the fence for perhaps 100 yards, found a small gate, and unlocked it with a key produced from under his belt. Maria, remembering their exit from the jail, was not surprised to feel a good-natured slap on the bottom as she stepped into Terran land. There was another quarter mile to go, but it was open land. "We have made it now," said Willard, locking the gate behind them. They bypassed the administration and custom buildings and headed directly for the field elevator beside the waiting spaceship, ignoring the possibility of causing inquiries to be made by local eagle eyes who might think they had seen 2 greenies board the vessel. "Willard, of the Department of Interstellar Relations," he introduced himself to a surprised ship's officer. "You've been told to expect Miss Ringstad." The officer, staring in bald disbelief at Maria's costume, admitted that the ship was more or less being held for her arrival. "One thing was unexpected," said Willard. "I am exercising my authority to demand a cabin for myself as well. I have reason to suspect that my disguise has been penetrated, which, of course, makes it very dangerous for me." "Of course," agreed the officer. "Let's go, by all means." "Yes," said Maria. "I want to get out of this awful rig." "That's what I meant," said Willard. There was no doubt that the influence behind Willard had held the ship for them. It rose as soon as they could reach a pair of tiny cabins. Later, after the first surge of the takeoff, there were a number of delays stretching between minor course corrections. Finally, it was announced over the public address system that because of precautionary checking of the course, there would be no spin to simulate planetary gravity for about 2 hours. Maria hoped that she would not be revealed as the cause to the disgruntled passengers. She was still considering this and trying to disentangle herself from the acceleration net slung in the 10-foot cubicle they were pleased to call a cabin, when Willard arrived. "I made friends with some of the crew," he announced. "Everybody likes to help out a DIR agent. It must strike them as romantic." "They should know," said Maria, thinking of the long, suspenseful walk through Greenhaven streets. "There was a stewardess who had extra slacks and blouse about your size." "You must have a good eye," she told him. "Or you think you have, anyhow. First, get me out of this thing. What with this greeny outfit, too, I might as well be in a straitjacket." He pushed himself over to the net and began to open the zipper. She saw that he had taken time to remove his greeny face. Her first motion, when the net was open, sent her tumbling head over heels to the far bulkhead. "Keep a grip on something," laughed Willard. "Here, I brought a small kit along. Let me fix your face." She obediently clung to the anchoring shock springs at one end of the net and turned her face up so that he could work on the mask he had earlier painted on. His fingers were gentle, smoothing in the cream he had brought and rubbing off the makeup with lightly perfumed tissues. Maria closed her eyes luxuriously and thought how pleasant it was to be off Greenhaven. "Was it very complicated getting me out of there?" she asked. "There were a lot of angles to think of," he answered. "But we pulled it off as slickly as I've ever seen done. Just strolled right through them all. Things in this business don't often go that well to plan. There. Now you look human again, just like when I started to put that face on you." "Not exactly," smiled Maria, plucking ruefully at the native Mother Hubbard, which billowed hideously about her in the zero gravity. "That's easily changed," Willard said, meeting her smile significantly. "See if you can find your way out any better than you did getting into it, while I sort out the clothes I got for us." Between the reaction from the strain of the past few hours and a glow of gratitude toward her rescuer, Maria began to sense the stir of an emotion within her that took a few moments to recognize. It surprised her a little. "Willard," she said lazily, "it's funny, but I feel just as if I'm falling in love with you." "That's interesting," grinned the agent. "About time, too." "I can't tell if my knees are weak," she went on, laying a hand on his shoulder to draw herself closer, "because I'm hanging in midair, but you always seem to be making me strip, and I find myself not minding." "I don't mind either," he assured her. When his arm slipped around her waist and he kissed her, Maria was sure. She let her lips part gradually, trembling as the fever rose in her. "Let me go a minute," she murmured. Presently, after a few weightless contortions, the muffling Greenhaven flannels were sent swirling into a corner. Maria laughed softly as she set a bare foot against the bulkhead to launch herself back into Willard's arms. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18. Was it the pain in his head that made everything seem to sway? Or was it the swaying that made his head hurt? Taranto opened his eyes slowly. For 2 or 3 minutes, in the darkness, he did not understand what he saw. Gradually, comprehension developed. He was on a litter again, and the bearers were descending a rough track into a shallow valley. There was no sign of the city, or of any other landmark even vaguely familiar. Jagged rocks formed a ridge to his left, curving around to enclose the depression. Other rocky buttes, he saw through slitted eyes, projected from the barren rubble of the valley floor. There seemed to be little sand, unless it had blown down into the lower areas. Cautiously, letting his head roll with the lurching motion of the bearers, he learned that another group was ahead. He thought they must be guarding Myers. The red-uniformed officer marched just preceding Taranto's litter. That meant that there must be 2 soldiers behind, out of his view. What now, he asked himself. It was a good try, but it didn't work out. It seemed hopeless to attempt anything further until he found out where he was. Nor would it do any harm to learn how he was. They must have crowned him beautifully. He tried to move his arms and legs slightly without being obviously restless. Nothing felt broken. There was just the sore throbbing behind his left ear. Were they taking him and Myers further into the desert to make sure they could properly be reported dead? Or was the party on its way back to the city? Taranto moved about stealthily, as the litter heaved from side to side and bounced about with the efforts of his bearers to negotiate outcroppings of rock. He was surprised that his arms and legs were not tied. He wondered how long he had been out cold. Perhaps the Sissokans believed he really was dead from that spear across the skull. "You shouldn't have underestimated that guy just because you dropped him a few times," he told himself. "You caught on to the difference, but he learned it from you." From ahead and lower on the path came voices. There was a brisk breeze, but Taranto thought he could recognize Myers giving vent to an outraged whine. "Wonder how much of a grudge they'll hold," he thought. "Some of them must be lumped up pretty good." He was beginning to locate a number of scrapes and bruises on his own sturdy frame. He wondered if it might be best to take things easy until they reached either their desert destination or the area outside the city, according to which way they were headed, and then offer to bribe the officer in charge. It would probably be too risky. He would have to rely on large promises, and they had already caught him in a crude whopper. Whatever the case, it would be unwise to open negotiations without finding out what the Sissokan commander looked like. Taranto seemed to recall pasting the fellow pretty thoroughly. He caught a few words of Terran, blown back to him by a random gust. Myers was complaining about being too tired to walk any further. It did not sound as though he were making his point. Of course, Taranto realized. I must be in his stretcher. Mine was busted. Now the slob will put it on me for making him bump his rump along this trail. The image was not without humor. Contemplating it gave Taranto a momentary satisfaction. Well, they knew Myers was alive, even if they might not be sure about Taranto himself. Perhaps they were merely saving both Terrans for a longer jail term. Taranto hoped that the Sissokans had nothing more unpleasant in mind. The remarks he had used earlier in his attempt to bluff the officer could be used for inimical purposes by anyone who cared to point out that Sisokan knowledge of Terran physiology was scanty. Then what? Taranto decided that he would be foolish to worry along that line at the present. What he needed was an idea for getting loose again. He speculated for a few minutes upon his chances of backtracking to the scene of his attempted escape. Somewhere near there, in whichever direction it was, a spaceship would be landing. If they ain't been and gone already, he thought. In his supine position on the stretcher, he was able to see the sky without moving. That was why the distant trail of light was visible to him for some moments before any of the Sisokans could notice it. I can't wait it out, after all, he realized. The ship would be heard presently, and the flare of its braking rockets would arouse the guards. Taranto peeked around again and saw that they were nearing the foot of the slope. Following the natural motion of the bearers, he let himself roll a little too far each time the litter swayed. The Sisokans struggled to compensate while scrabbling for safe footholds on the hard, slippery surface. In the end, one of them slipped. The litter crashed down. Taranto added a twist to the natural force of gravity so that he rolled downhill. The fallen bearer picked himself up, mumbling something in Sisokan that sounded remarkably belligerent. One of the others moved to recover the stretcher. Taranto kept on rolling. At the first yell, he gave up the pretense and regained his feet with a lithe bound. For the next 60 seconds, he needed every last smidgen of concentration to escape taking a fatal spill on the sloping rocks. Hurtling downward in great leaps, he was forced to hurdle large rocks because his velocity prevented him from changing course by even a foot. Once he skidded, thinking his time had come. Near the bottom, where the incline curved to meet the horizontal, he did go down, plowing up a spatter of loose chips and pebbles. He was up and running again, without quite knowing how. A dark shape loomed up before him, a rock twice his height. Before passing it, he took the chance of looking back. The litter party was in a state of confusion. The officer and 2 soldiers were bounding after him, slanting away on a more reasonable path. One Sisokan was still in the process of picking himself up, and most of the others were either milling about or just beginning to heed their leader's shouts to follow Taranto. The intention of yelling to Myers flashed across his mind, but he dismissed it as being useless. A hasty glance in the opposite direction showed him the fire trail setting behind another ridge to his front. The valley bore a certain resemblance to a meteor crater. Taranto sprinted past the huge rock and bore right toward the distant ridge. He would try to locate the ship if and when he reached the ridge. The immediate necessity was to keep out of the clutches of the burial party. Running in the starlit darkness was risky, as he soon found. The ground was strewn with occasional patches of loose stone, traps of nature suitable for tripping the unwary or causing a sprain. The only thing that kept Taranto reckless was the sounds of pursuit behind him. He had gone about 200 yards when he realized that some of the rock-scattering noises came from his right more than from behind. The Sisokan were better runners than he, and used to the local terrain besides. He could not tell whether they had seen the trail of the spaceship, or if so, whether they connected it with him. But they know enough to head me off whichever way I go, he thought. He came unexpectedly to a patch of sand, and swore as he felt his speed slacken. A desperate glance over his shoulder revealed no pursuers, though he knew they were there somewhere. He could see 2 runners who had flanked him on the right 50 yards off, and these forced him into bearing away from his desired course. Instead of passing to the right of a tall outcropping of rock ahead, he turned left. It took him farther from the direction of the spaceship, but there was no help for it. He floundered over a low dune of sand, and then was out of it and running on flat ground. He circled to the left of the hill, hearing a howl from the rear. Must have seen me against the open valley, thought Taranto. They sound closer than I like. He ran on, scanning the shadowed rocks towering over him for a place to climb. It was a foregone conclusion that the 2 flankers would be on the lookout for him as he came around the hill. At last he thought he saw a way up, a sloping ledge leading to a small plateau before the rock reared higher in a sheer cliff. Up he went, on hands and toes. The rock was ridged, but in the wrong direction, and he slipped to hands and knees twice before he was up. He slowed to a quick walk as he reached the level expanse. It was 10 or 12 feet above the valley floor and curved off to the right around the base of the cliff. Taranto was panting by now, but his main reason for slowing was that he wanted to make less noise until he spotted the 2 Sisokans he expected to meet. The broad ledge he was following dipped, rose a few feet, and dipped again to less than 10 feet above the level ground. Taranto flattened himself suddenly. The 2 Sisokans came loping along the shadowy edge of the outcropping, spears at the ready. From around the cliff sounded a call. The first soldier threw back his head to answer. As the howl left his throat and masked the noise of the Terrans scrambling, Taranto launched himself upon the back of the second. They went down with a thump upon hard rocks. Taranto, saving his ribs from being caved in by fending himself off from a jagged rock with his forearm, kicked out and caught the downed Sisokan in the belly. As the soldier subsided, The Terran snatched up the spear and rose to face the other one. It had all gone so fast that the leader was just turning back. Perhaps he thought merely that his companion had fallen, but the stocky silhouette of the spacer disabused him of that idea. He advanced, with the point of his spear weaving about menacingly. "You think you're good with that stick, eh?" growled Taranto. "We'll try this for something different." Gripping his spear near the head, he swung the heavier butt like a bat, putting as much power into it as he could. It was crude, but he knew better than to try to match skills with a soldier trained to the use of the weapon. The butt cracked resoundingly against the shaft of the Sisokan's spear, tearing it from the grip of his leading hand. Taranto's own hands were numbed by the shock. He dropped his spear and slid inside the Sisokan's one-handed grip before it could be reinforced. The feint of a left hook to the belly made the soldier relinquish his weapon completely and grapple with the spacer. Taranto found his left arm entwined with the right of the Sisokan. He tried twice to punch to the body with his free hand, but was smothered. Before he could think of it himself, the Sisokan stamped hard upon his toes. "Bastard!" spat the spacer. He butted, successfully but profitlessly. He rabbit-punched twice with his right hand, reaching around under the soldier's armpit. Only when he gouged at a large black eye did the defending arm come up. Taranto set his feet and banged 3 times to the midsection, getting plenty of body twist into his motion. He found himself holding a very limp Sisokan, who slid down as the spacer stepped back. Taranto sucked in a gasping breath. He staggered aside to pick up the spears, feeling better now that he was armed, no matter how primitively. He had hardly straightened up when he saw the officer round the edge of the little butte, a mere 50 feet away. The Sisokan hesitated at the sight of the Terran standing over 2 of his soldiers, and Taranto threw one of the spears. The trouble was that he did not know how to handle one. A spear, after all, was not standard equipment on a spaceship. The point twisted away from the target, and much of the force went into a slow spin. The officer hissed a disdainful comment and caught the weapon out of the air with one hand. Taranto stooped for a rock, which he hurled with more effect. It shattered with a fine crack against the cliff, near enough to the Sisokan to make him throw himself behind a boulder for cover. Taranto left him in the middle of a yell to his soldiers and sprinted off into the open valley. Carrying the spear did not help matters much, but he thought the Sisokans might regard it as a more dangerous deterrent than he knew it to be in his untrained hands. The next time he looked around, he saw that he could rejoice in a splendid lead of 200 yards. On the other hand, the officer now had a numerous group with him, and would probably get organized at last. Taranto slowed to a jog, to save himself against the time when they should begin to catch up. "Taranto!" said a small voice. He broke automatically into a dead run without even looking around. "Wait, Taranto!" called the little voice. "Look up, for the spy eye!" The spacer slowed as understanding burst upon him. He looked back and saw a spark of light gaining on him. It arrived and hovered over his head. "It may still work," the voice informed him. "The ship is down. I told them what happened and they're putting up a helicopter." "Where's Myers?" "I don't know," said Taranto. "Back on the ridge, I guess." "Look, I can't just stand here until that copter comes. I'll be a pincushion." "Head for that hill ahead, about a quarter mile," said the voice from the little flyer. "I'll guide them there." The Sisokans were running now, spreading out in a well-drilled manner. Taranto boosted himself into high speed again. The hill ahead was more toward the center of the valley. If the pursuers were aware of some connection between his flight and the position of the spaceship, they would be satisfied to have him heading away from the ridge and closing the valley. Taranto hoped that they would not worry enough to turn on a burst of speed, for he was convinced that they could outrun him. He was right. He reached the steep slopes of the hill with a bare 50 yards left of his lead, and he was on the point of foundering at that. His knees buckled for an instant as he hit the first rise, and he saved himself from pitching on his face only by thrusting out the butt of the spear he carried. Somehow he made it another 50 feet up the slope, hearing the voice beside his ear say, "To the right, Taranto. Head for that flat spot. Here comes the helicopter." He wiped salty sweat from his eyes with the back of one hand and looked up. A large, quietly whirring shape shadowed the stars. It dropped rapidly toward him as a howl broke out behind him. Taranto took the spear in both hands, holding it at one end, and sent it whirling end over end at the closing Sisokans. The whole center of the group dropped flat to let it swish over their heads. Before they could rise, the helicopter reached Taranto. It came down so fast it bounced against the ground. Someone held out a hand to Taranto and yelled to him to jump. He was hauled into an open cockpit. Someone took a death grip on the waistband of his pants and he felt the helicopter climb. He wiggled around until he could get his knees under him. There were 2 spacers in the cockpit of what was obviously an auxiliary craft from a spaceship. One of them, a very long-eared type with a narrow head, looked as if he had been born in some stellar colony. The other had a broad, bland face of an Oriental Terran. "Where is the other one?" asked the latter. Taranto crept between the seats to which they were strapped before answering, for there were only chains at the open sides. He got his bearings and directed the long-eared pilot to the ridge where he had rolled out of the litter. It nearly broke his heart to see them reach it in less than a minute. "There may be guards with him," he warned. "Maybe he took off too. We shall see," said the broad-faced spacer. He ran a spotlight along the ridge, stopped, and brought it back to bear upon a lonely figure. Myers stood up and waved. No Sisokan was in sight. The officer must have taken them all with him. He knew what he was doing, thought Taranto. The guy's still here. The helicopter eased down to hover over a large rock. Myers climbed laboriously upon it and was hauled aboard. Taranto squeezed himself back behind the seats to make room. "It's about time you got here," puffed Myers. "I'm worn out." Taranto said nothing as the craft rose in the air and swooped off toward the spaceship. Someday Myers would ask how he had gotten away from the Sisokans. When it happened, Taranto swore to himself he would show the slob.
End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
Chapter 19. It was 20 after 8 when Westervelt found himself back at the communications room with Smith. Rosencrantz had alerted them to a message coming in from Sisoka. "They didn't expect to hit us during office hours," he explained. "But as long as you're here, I thought maybe you'd like to get it fresh." Smith had told the girls to pass the word to Leidman and Parrish, and Westervelt had followed him down the hall with the feeling that he had displayed his eye under the good lighting long enough. Now they listened as a slim brown-haired man, with a faintly scholarly aura, completed his report on the escape of Louis Taranto and Harley Myers, spacers. Joe Rosencrantz was fiddling with an auxiliary screen and murmuring into another microphone. "So it was a rather close call, even though the formula you sent us appears to have worked perfectly," said the scholarly man. "I have not been able to determine exactly what caused the delay on the part of the Sisokans, since it seemed imprudent to display my little flying spy eye where it might be seen, or even damaged." "Maybe you can pick up some rumors in the future," suggested Smith. "If you do, we'd appreciate hearing them, to add to our file and make the case as complete as possible." The transmission lag was much less than that occurring with Trident. The DIR man on Sisoka agreed to forward any subsequent discoveries. "Those spacers you contacted are already heading out system," he told Smith. "I think they did a nice clean job. It was too bad that they were seen at all, of course. But it will be news to me if the Sisokans drop around with any embarrassing questions." "Well, there is a large foreign quarter there," Smith recalled. "Why should they suspect Terrans after all?" "Oh, they will. They will. They suspect everyone. But they must know so little that I feel sure I can bluff them. I can prove that I was here at the official residence all day." "Good," said Smith. "Just in passing, I take it that no one was much hurt." The man on Sisokan grinned briefly. "No one on our side," he said, "although I understand the prisoners were suffering some from exhaustion and dehydration. This Louis Taranto seems to be quite a lad. There is reason to believe that he killed 2 or 3 of his guards with his bare hands. At least I saw the burial party carrying bodies with them as they marched the rest of the way back to the city." Smith laughed. "I'll have to add a note opposite his name and contact him. I could use a field agent like that. Well, my operator tells me I have another call coming in. Thanks for your work on this." "A pleasure," said the man on Sisoka. "I really didn't expect to contact you directly. My relative time atlas must be a little old." "No, it's just that we never sleep, you know," quipped Smith, and signed off. He looked around, saw that it was Parrish who had entered, and added, "At least it looks as if we'll never sleep. I'm getting tired of it myself." "So is everybody except Joe here," said Parrish. "A con man isn't normal anyway." "You gotta learn not to let all this stuff coming through bother you," said Rosencrantz wisely. "If I soaked up all these crazy calls, I'd have nightmares every day. As it is, I'm as normal as anybody when I leave here." "You haven't been with us long enough," said Smith. "What else do you have there?" "There was a routine memo to make a check with the planet Greenhaven," said Rosencrantz. "I cleared it when a good time came. The DIR station there pretended not to know what I was talking about." "What?" yelped Smith. "Don't tell me we goofed on another one." "I don't think so," said Rosencrantz. "While you were talking to Sisoka, a spaceship named Vulpecula called. Said there was reason to believe the Greenhaven DIR was locally monitored. Tapped or the scrambler system broken," said Parrish. "What does this ship want to talk about?" "The Ringstad case." "Joe, goddammit, who says you're normal?" demanded Smith. "I bet we sprung another one. 2 in one night. We're coming out with a good average after all. Get them on the screen before I pop my tanks." Westervelt listened to the transmission from the spaceship. Without the help of a planetary relay at the far end, it tended to be a trifle weak and wavery, but the essentials came through. He left Smith and Parrish patting each other on the back and went back to tell the girls about it. They clustered around him in the main office, even Pauline leaving her cubicle for a moment and keeping one ear pointed at the switchboard inside. "You should have heard Smitty conning her out of writing us up for the news magazines," said Westervelt. "She seems to be pretty famous in her line." "What was she like?" asked Simonetta. "She looked blondish, but the color wasn't coming across too well. Not bad looking, in a breezy sort of way. The agent that sprung her had to skip too, because he thought the Greenhavens, they called them Greenies, had spotted his disguise." "Oh boy," breathed Pauline. "The cops must be hot on their trail." "Either that, or he wanted to go along with her for other reasons," said Westervelt. "They seemed kind of chummy." "Can they do that?" asked Beryl. "I mean, without orders and all that?" Westervelt grinned. "I don't know," he admitted, "but he's doing it. He can't go back now." Anyway, Smitty simmered down fast and promised a draft for expenses would be waiting for him when the ship made planetfall. Technically, the DIR ought to pay, because it turns out the guy is on their rolls and was only working with us temporarily. Simonetta nodded wisely. "You watch our boss," she predicted. "He'll add this man on our lists. He always gets free with money when he sees a good prospect from the main branch. Even if they stay in the honest side of the outfit, they cooperate with the back room here." Smith walked in with Parrish, beaming. His eyes found Westervelt. "Willie," he said, "make a note, and tomorrow look up the planet Rochin 2. I had to send credits, and I didn't want to stay into wide space that I didn't know where it is. Bad for the department's prestige." He looked about genially. "I see you've told the news," he commented. "It was a lift for me, too. We haven't done too badly after all. 1-2, lost 1. Damn, and 1 is still a stalemate." "Anyone tell Bob?" asked Parrish quietly. They all exchanged searching glances. Smith began to lose some of his ebullience. After a moment, he turned to Pauline. "Buzz his office," he said in a preoccupied tone. Westervelt tried to subdue a mild chill along the backbone as Pauline gave Smith a wide-eyed look and slipped into her cubbyhole. He couldn't have phoned downstairs, he assured himself. Pauline would say all the lines were busy, or cut off or something. But what if he looked out a window? Smith had sauntered over to her center desk where he waited beside the phone. It seemed to be taking Pauline a long time. "Check with Joe," advised Parrish. "Then try around the other rooms. 10 to 1 he's in the lab." "Has anyone seen him in the last half hour?" asked Smith. Westervelt pointed out that he had been in the chief's company in the communications room. The girls had not seen Leidman, but admitted that he might have gone past in the corridor without their having noticed. "Yeah, he doesn't make much noise," Parrish agreed. Smith had a thought. He moved toward his own office, paused to jerk his head significantly toward Parrish's, and opened his own door. Parrish went over past Beryl's desk and thrust his head into his own office. Leidman was not in either room. "Mr. Smith," called Pauline in a worried tone. "I'm sorry, but I can't seem to reach him." "Oh, Christ," said Parrish. "He isn't talking again." He did something Westervelt had never seen that self-possessed man resort to before this evening. He began to gnaw nervously upon a knuckle. He saw the youth staring and snatched his hand from his mouth. Smith glowered unhappily at the floor. Westervelt thought he could hear his own pulse, so quiet had the office grown. The chief backed up to the unpleasant decision. "We'd better spread out and wander around until someone sees him face to face," he said. "If he wants to be let alone, let him alone. Just pass the word on where he is." Westervelt volunteered to go down one wing, while Parrish took the other. As they left, cautioned to take their time and act natural, Smith was telling the girls to open the doors to the adjacent offices again, and keep their ears tuned, in case Leidman should come looking for him or Parrish. Westervelt turned right past the stairs and went to the door of the library. "It will be perfectly natural," he told himself. "We made out on 2 cases. I just want to tell him about it, in case he hasn't heard. Why the hell don't they get that cable fixed? They want their bills paid on time, don't they?" He could hear the newscasts now, about how tough a job the electricians faced, and how tense was the situation. Westervelt decided he would not listen. He opened the door to the library casually and sauntered in. The pose was wasted. Leidman was not there. Westervelt went on to the conference room on this side, and found it empty as well. He looked in on Joe Rosencrantz, who, from the door, appeared to be alone. Just to leave no stone unturned, he retreated up the hall to the door marked Shaft, and poked his head inside. He had to grope around for a light switch, and when he found it, was rewarded with nothing more than the sight of a number of conduits, running from floor to unfinished ceiling. A little dust drifted down on him, from atop the ones that bent to run to outlets on the same floor. "Well, nobody can say I overlooked anything," grumbled Westervelt. He went back to the communications room. Rosencrantz was listening in on some conversation from a station on Luna that was none of his business. "Any sign of Leidman around here?" asked Westervelt. Not since the Yolene brawl, grunted Rosencrantz. That's a good-looking babe running that lunar station. Why can't we dig up some messages for them? I'll work on it, promised Westervelt half-heartedly. He walked quietly around the corner past the power equipment. No Leidman. The next step was the laboratory. He looked at his watch, then leaned against the wire mesh partition for a good 10 minutes. Let Parrish cover the ground, he decided. In the end, with no sign of Parrish or Leidman, he opened the door and stepped into the dark laboratory. He made his way cautiously ahead, thinking that Leidman was probably in his office. Feeling his path with slow steps, and carefully avoiding the possibility of tipping over any of the stacks of cartons, he had progressed to the center of the large chamber when the lights went on. Westervelt felt as if he had jumped a foot, and the blood pounded through his veins. Gasping around with open mouth, he finally met the eye of Pete Parrish, who stood half inside the doorway to the corridor, his hand still raised to the light switch. They both relaxed. Parrish smiled feebly, with less than normal display of his fine teeth. Westervelt contented himself with passing a hand across his forehead. It came away damp. "Well," said Parrish, "where was he?" Westervelt closed his eyes and groaned. "You're kidding," he said. "Please say you're kidding." "It's too late in the day to fool around, Pete." Parrish looked alarmed. He strode forward, letting the door close behind him. Westervelt, finding himself shivering in a draft, went to meet him. "I'm not kidding at all," said Parrish. "Did you look everywhere? Are you sure?" "I even poked into the power shaft," retorted Westervelt. "Were you in his office?" "Naturally. I checked everything, even the men's room." They had wandered back to the corridor door, peering about the laboratory to make sure no one could have concealed himself on the floor under a workbench or behind a pile of cartons. Parrish opened the door, and they stood puzzling at the empty hall. "He wasn't even taking a shower," said the elder man. Westervelt brooded for a moment. "Did you say everywhere?" he insisted. "Well, everywhere he would have any call to go." They stood there, passing the buck silently back and forth between them. At length, Parrish said, "I'll just look again in his office and the other two rooms, in case he was, and slipped out behind me." Westervelt watched him run lightly up the hall to each of the doors. Parrish's expression, as he returned slowly, was something to behold. "I'll go," said Westervelt grouchily. Parrish put a hand on his arm. "No, that wouldn't look natural. I'll phone Smitty to send one of the girls down." "Better phone him to send two," suggested Westervelt. "Yeah," agreed Parrish. "That's even more natural. Watch the hall while I buzz them." He went into Leidman's office. Westervelt leaned in the laboratory doorway, feeling depressed. After some delay, he sighted Simonetta and Beryl turn in the far corner with their pocketbooks in hand. Neither one looked particularly pleased, but their expressions lightened a bit at the sight of him. "You there, Pete?" murmured Westervelt. "Right at the door," whispered Parrish from inside Leidman's office. The girls clicked in muffled unison along the hall. Beryl paused at the entrance to the ladies' room. She raised her eyebrows uncertainly at Simonetta. The dark girl threw Westervelt a puzzled shrug, then pushed past Beryl and went inside. The blonde followed, almost on her heels. Westervelt waited. When he thought he could no longer stand it, Parrish hissed, "How long are they in there, Willie?" "I don't know," said the youth, "but maybe we'd better—" The door opened. Simonetta and Beryl walked out, staring quizzically at the two men, who had taken a few steps toward them. "What is this gag?" asked Simonetta. "There's no one in there. Who would be in there?" Parrish swore luridly, and none of them seemed to notice. "It can't be," he exclaimed. "You're sure?" "Of course we're sure," said Beryl. "What if the power came on and we didn't notice?" mused Parrish. "You know him better than I do," commented Beryl. "I'm beginning to wonder, from what you told us on the phone, if he jumped out of a window somewhere." "I know it's a terrible thing to bring up." Westervelt stopped listening to her. He was remembering the draft he had felt, twice now, in the laboratory. End of chapter 19. Of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. Westervelt watched them walk up the hall. He thought of going back into the laboratory to find the open window. In his mind, he could see the straight 25-story drop down the side of the dark tower to the roof of the larger part of the building. He recalled having looked down once or twice. The people down there had paved patios outside their offices. A hurtling body would... He shook the thought out of his head and hurried to catch up to Parrish and the two girls. They trooped into the main office and took turns in telling Smith the story. He flatly refused to believe it for about 5 minutes. Ultimately convinced, he told Pauline to check Rosencrantz by phone every 10 minutes. "If we're wrong," he said, "it's unfair to have him sitting down there all alone. Bob might somehow have outsmarted us, but if he did it to this extent, it means he isn't safe on the loose. Westervelt noticed that Simonetta was looking pale. He wondered about his own features. The eye would probably stand out very picturesquely. I don't believe it, he said, when the others had fallen silent. They looked at him, hoping to be convinced. He isn't that kind, said Westervelt. All right, you tell me he had a hard time in space, and it left him a little off. But this doesn't sound like the direction he would go off in. What do you mean, Willie? Asked Smith intently. Well, maybe he'd run wild. Maybe he'd get desperate and blow something up. I could see him taking a torch to that door and burning anybody that tried to stop him. He paused as they hung on his words. But I can't see him quitting, said Westervelt. If he was that kind, he never would have gotten back to Terra, would he? Smith snapped his fingers and looked around. Sure, he said. I don't know what I was thinking up in my imagination. We've all heard Bob utter a threat now and then, when some bims out in deep space broke his own private law, but no one ever heard him even hint at suicide. He grinned ruefully and added, I should have thought of it myself. I had to review his application and examinations when he came to us. Some days, said Parrish, are just too much. Nobody's fault. Then in that case, said Westervelt, there was one little thing I noticed. He told them about the open window. Who would keep a window open with the building air conditioning operating as perfectly as it did? Smith fell to running his hands through his hair again. Now let's think, he muttered. There must be some logical explanation. Logical explanations, Westervelt thought, are always the reasons other people think of. He found a space to sit on the edge of the empty desk. Simonetta leaned beside him, and Beryl wandered over to the window of the switchboard cubicle to listen as Pauline checked Rosencrantz. She shook her head to Smith's inquiring look. Then Leidman strolled through the double doors. What's the conference about? He asked. Beryl let out a shriek. Her back had been to the corridor when she jumped, but she came down facing the other way. Everyone stiffened. Leidman stood quietly, regarded them with considerable calm. After a moment, Beryl tottered back to lean against the glass of Pauline's window. She pressed one hand to her solar plexus, looking as if she might fold up at any breath. Oh, she gasped. Oh, Mr. Leidman. He examined her with clinical detachment. Doesn't someone have a tranquilizer for her? He asked. I don't usually scare pretty girls. Oh, no. It's just that, everyone was worried about you, stammered Beryl. Why? Asked Leidman. Don't you think I can take care of myself? For the first time, Westervelt noticed the curiously set expression on the ex-spacer's face. He had until then been too busy watching Beryl and trying to calm his own nerves. He could not be certain, but it seemed as if Leidman's forehead displayed a faint sheen of perspiration. Of course you can, Bob, said Smith. Beryl, nearly to the point of hysteria in her relief, got the ball away from him. We were worried about the elevator being stopped, she babbled, and the door. You'll never believe it, Mr. Leidman, but the door to the emergency stairs wouldn't open. Westervelt thought he heard Parrish swear, then realized it had been his own voice. He started to step in front of Simonetta. Parrish was moving slowly in Leidman's direction, trying to look at ease but looking tense instead. Damn it, shouted Smith. Beryl, you're fired. It did not seem to register on anybody, Beryl least of all. Leidman was confounding them all by standing quietly. His face tightened a little more at the news, but it did not seem to be the expression of a man who had just taken a bad jolt. I know, he said. I looked at it a couple of times after I saw the blackout downstairs. Smith regarded him warily. How do you feel, Bob? He asked. You know how I feel, said Leidman. He let his gaze wander from one to another of them. Westervelt felt a chill as the handsome eyes looked through him in turn, but accepted the comforting realization that the stare was about as usual. Beryl was the picture of a girl afraid to breathe out loud, but the others relaxed cautiously. Smith even planted one hip on the corner of Simonetta's desk and tried to look casual. You seem to be doing pretty well, he said. We were thinking of looking in the lab for something to cut the latch with, but it might have been waste motion. They should be getting the power on any minute now. I think, Leidman began. Oh, I guess we could find something in the lists, pursued Smith. If you'd rather we look. I have several things we could use, said Leidman. He walked into the office proper and looked about for a chair. Westervelt stepped back of the center desk and brought in the chair of the vacationing secretary. Leidman sat down beside the partition screening the active files opposite Simonetta's desk. In fact, continued the ex-spacer, I got them out when I was trying to figure out how much that door would stand. Then I decided that would only raise a commotion. Westervelt watched him with growing interest. Now that he had the man at closer range, he was sure that it was a tremendous effort of will that kept Leibman so relatively calm. The man seemed to be seething underneath his tautly controlled exterior. "What did you think of doing?" asked Smith carefully. "Oh, I dug out a better gadget, one that would do me more good anyhow," said Leibman. "It's a little rocket gun attached to a canister of fine wire ladder." "Wire ladder?" repeated Smith. "Yeah, about 6 inches wide at the most. I opened a window and shot it up to the flight deck. Say, did you know some hijackers stole all 3 of our copters?" "Stole all 3 of—" Smith's voice dwindled away. When no one else broke the silence, he forced himself to resume. "Yes, I knew. What I would deeply appreciate, Robert, is your telling me how the hell you knew," he finished yelling. Westervelt thought he looked at least as bad as Leibman. Anyone 20 feet away would have completely misjudged him. "Just as I said," answered Leibman with his tight calm. "I shot this ladder to the roof and climbed up." "You climbed up? Outside the building?" "Of course, outside," said Leibman for the first time, showing a trace of snappishness. "I couldn't stand it inside." He looked around at them again, surprised that there was the slightest hesitation to accept his statement. "We'll have to redesign that ladder, though," he said. "It's a mite too fine. Cuts the hell out of your hands." He held out his palms. Across each were several welts. One, on his right hand, had apparently resumed bleeding, stickily, since Leibman had come in. He fumbled out a handkerchief with his other hand and blotted it. Smith held his hands to his head. "I can't swallow it yet," he groaned. "So you feel uneasy in here, so you go out a window 99 floors in the air?" "Only 24 above the setback, really," Leibman corrected him. "It's enough, isn't it? So you go out, climb up to the helicopter roof, and then climb down again, and back through the window? And you pretend to feel better? I would have had a heart attack." "Who wouldn't?" said Westervelt. The mere conception of what it must have been like made him feel sick. "As long as I know it's there," muttered Leibman. "As long as I know it's there. I can use that way any time. Just don't anybody pull that little ladder down. Would—" The meek little syllable came from Beryl, who had now managed to stand without the support of the partition. Every head in the room swiveled to bear upon her. She gulped and found part of her voice. "Would there be an old martini lying around in the locker?" she asked. "I'm afraid to go for it myself, because my knees feel as if they'll collapse at the first step." There was a general outburst of laughter that revealed the enormity of their relief. Parrish hurried over to put an arm around the blonde, and Smith himself went to the locker and opened it. With the break in tension, Beryl managed to walk pretty well, perhaps with a little more swagger of the hips than usual, Westervelt thought. Smith found a drink for her, and insisted that Leibman have tea. The chief pulled the tab himself and held the cup for the few seconds required to heat the beverage. Most of them, like Westervelt, had had too many coffees or sandwiches, and were content to sit down and regain their composure. Westervelt was mildly surprised to see Parrish take a position behind Leibman, and knead the big man's neck muscles to relax him. "Did they tell you the news yet?" asked Smith. "We got 2 out, Sosoka and Greenhaven." "No," said Leibman, managing a smile. "Tell me, but if I get up and leave in the middle, I'd rather you didn't stop me." "Nobody's stopping anybody tonight," said Smith, and fell to giving his assistant an account of Taranto and Myers. Westervelt got up quietly and patted into the switchboard cubbyhole. "Lend me your headset, Pauline," he murmured, "and punch Joe's number." "Sure," said the little blonde. She left the screen off and kissed him behind the ear just as Rosencrantz answered. "Nothing personal, Willie," she giggled. "I just feel so relieved." "Who is it now?" demanded Rosencrantz's voice. "You left the lens off. Did you know that?" "It's Willie, Joe. He came back and he's sitting down having tea." "Back? Where was he?" Westervelt told him. Then he told him again and switched off. Joe, he thought, would have to live with it for a while. When he stepped out of the cubicle, everyone was watching Smith narrate, with broad gestures, the flummoxing of the state authorities of Greenhaven. The chief was not above calling upon Parrish for an estimate of the charms of Maria Ringstad that caused an outcry among the girls. Leibman smiled politely, but not from the heart. He was still quietly reserved. Everyone was watching Smith. No one paid any attention to the red-haired man who drifted into the office area just as Westervelt squirmed past Pauline and stepped out of the switchboard room. The youth blinked at the topcoat over the man's arm. He focused upon the wavy hair and reached for the man's shoulder to turn him around. "Charlie Colburn!" he yelped. Smith got it first. "Well now," he said, standing up. "If it's getting so everybody and his brother start parading through that door at this time of night, I'm leaving. Where's my hat, Si?" Leibman had caught on almost as quickly and was on his feet before the general whoop went up. I just want to phone my wife, said Colburn. It's so late I might as well stay here the rest of the night. What's keeping all of you? They glared at him. The power's been on for 15 minutes, he told them. I would have been up sooner, but that nut of a building manager insisted on running test trips with all the elevators before he'd let anyone come up. Leidman had started for the elevator, in shirt sleeves as he was, and carrying a cup of tea in one hand and a bloody handkerchief. There was no doubt that he meant to go home that way. Bob, roared Smith. All of you, listen. Leidman stopped, but did not turn around. In the first place, Charlie, said Smith, you are not going to call your wife from here unless you faithfully give the impression that you are all alone. If you slip, I'll swear to her I saw you picked up by 2 redheads in a helicopter and you had all the office petty cash with you. But tell her the traffic was too much. Don't tell her we couldn't get to the street. That goes for everybody else too. But why? Colburn got out. Why? You want the DIR boys throwing this up to us every time I try to get money out of them for the bare necessities of our operation? We can get people out of the dungeons on planets not even on the Galatlas, but can't even escape from our own little hideaway? It never happened, Parrish agreed quickly. Damn right, said Smith. Okay, Bob, push the button. Go with him, Willie. You girls, nobody in before noon tomorrow. We have an extra TV operator to take care of things. Look, Guy, Colburn started to say as he stepped out of Westervelt's way. Aw, thanks for phoning in the first place, grinned Smith, punching him lightly on the shoulder. Wait for me downstairs, Willie. We'll see what we can do about Harris tomorrow. Appoint him an ambassador, muttered Westervelt, coming up behind Leidman as the elevator door slid smoothly open. What an outfit, he thought to himself. I'm going to apply for field duty. End of chapter 20. End of D-99 by H.B. Fyfe.